Hello, this is Adam from Human Alchemy. Fear, Loathing and Lockdown. Now, that's a strange title, but I'm sure most of us have experienced the changes in behaviour we've had. You might have experienced in the workplace or in your family or friendship group, or you might have just noticed it in society. People are getting a bit weird and like they've changed it during lockdown. I'm going to talk in this video about the sort of science behind, the neuroscience behind how being in isolation during a pandemic, during winter especially, conspire together to create fear and loathing in lockdown, and also how it can be countered. So, it's well known in anthropology that during periods of pandemic, behaviours such as right-wing authoritarianism increase. I believe Jordan Peterson talks about it quite a lot, and I'll link his YouTube video on the topic below. So during a period of pandemic, the human sort of mood turns towards survival mode and avoiding contamination threats. And the mechanism it does this in the brain, it's through a social, well, primarily social neuropeptide called, well, it does a whole lot of things actually, Vasopressin. So, or Vasopressin. So what Vasopressin does is it's basically a sort of scarcity and conflict type indicator. It's also known as anti-diuretic hormone, so it reduces urination, for example. So, like, the easiest way to imagine it is in like, I don't know, a place where food's scarce, water's scarce. You want to hold on to your resources. So you hold on to your water, you hold on to your salt. That's one of the other effects of vasopressin. But also, it has psychological effects in the brain, like. Vasopressin is linked to dominance hierarchies and sort of like team mentality, like us versus them, and also things like obsessive compulsive disorder, borderline personality disorder, antisocial behaviour, and a whole cluster of conflict related issues. So when the brain receives stimulus through the eyes, for the sensory organs, and it comes together in the olfactory lobe. If your brain's architecture senses that there's a noxious stimuli present, for example, some foul-smelling odor, or some diseased person, or for some people get disgusted by homeless people, or people from different creeds or colours or nations, xenophobia and racism and lots of bad things, or members of an opposing football team. So what happens in the pandemic, this sense is sort of increased because there's a collective fear around catching a disease that can kill up to 1% of people, or the coronavirus. It's very harmful if you get it, and it's long COVID. And there's sort of like a moral panic around it, which is legitimate because it's a very threatening disease. And part of our work at Human Alchemy, my work and my research is aimed at boosting the immune system to make COVID no worse than a common cold through immune system modulation. But that'll be a subject of a later video and further research. So in a pandemic, it has a similar effect to being in like a dirty city, like places without sanitation, or without sort of prim and proper order. So when vasopressin's upregulated, there's the serotonin receptors in perception, linked to perception, sort of shift valence towards a negative bias. So the mind changes during a pandemic to upregulate vasopressin and change the perception through the serotonin system to negative bias, right? So it's avoiding threats, keeping on, being conservative, sort of holding on to resources, perhaps unreasonably so these days, because in the past, when you had a bubonic plague or some outbreak of some measles, smallpox, hundreds of thousands would die, and there'd be food famine and food shortages and famine and cholera in the water, and it made sense in previous evolutionary times to sort of hoard and sort of cling on to resources and be a bit more sort of animalistic in behaviour. But during this coronavirus, really people just need to stay at home and take a vaccine, and keep healthy at the same time. And there's no real need for a lot of the sort of negative behaviours, really, but it's a natural byproduct of the situation. And with vasopressin, it's also pro-loyalty. So, for example, with your romantic partner, your wife or husband, let's say, vasopressin works through, it's like a possessiveness. You can't be attracted, really motivated to approach or romantically engage with other people than your partner, because it sort of shuts off thinking about other people. Oh, she's attractive, but I wouldn't think about it like that. I love my girlfriend, yeah. Or let's say, it also works quite perversely sometimes, because it works in sort of political corruption and sort of cover-up type stuff, let's say the Me Too scandal. Or let's say Jimmy Savile, that's a good example. Jimmy Savile was a paedophile who people knew about. I think Margaret Thatcher knew about him, the BBC certainly knew about him. But there was a hush-hush, there was a deafening silence about it, and there was a suppression, because he was regarded as an authoritative, sort of kind of leading figure in the entertainment industry. And it was too inconvenient to out him as a paedophile, and the longer time went along, the more awkward it got, because people would have been outed for covering him up and complicit in that. Anyway, so vasopressin, it can work positively in terms of romantic partners, but it can also be linked to domestic abuse. Actually, for example, if you're the romantic partner, someone's infatuated about, leaves them or disobeys them, or puts the relationship at risk, can cause domestic violence. For example, I heard a statistic: 40% of the police force in the US have done domestic violence. Now that's a bold figure, and I'm sure it's the vast majority of I'm sure the majority, or let's say a substantial portion of the US police force are completely nice and normal, let's say, and upstanding members of law and order. But US police, they have a really tricky situation, because they've got to deal with people with guns and really some crazy cartel crime. For example, here in the UK, that we don't have guns. We've got we have issues, but nowhere near America with assault rifles and stuff. So in a warlike law enforcement environment, where there's lots of noxious stimuli, like threats and stuff, and unfortunately racial diversity, it can trigger sort of opposing team mentalities through this vasopressin network in the brain, with racism and stuff. So where are we? So fear and loathing in lockdown. All this vasopressin-mediated pathology, or let's say types of human nature, which serve a purpose in dealing with scarcity and threat and disease, avoiding disease, it can be sort of ameliorated, so like reduced in negative effect by bonding and social relationships through oxytocin. Because what oxytocin does is it provides sort of close bonding with between intimate, or let's say close, trusted community and sort of friends, family, relations, people in society that are known and trusted, it can sort of bypass a lot of that vasopressin. So you might, for example, you might have had a sibling growing up where you had sibling rivalry, or a friend that you fell out with, and you had like you might have fought or argued, but then once you've gone through all that, then it's shake hands, make up, and back to a sort of friendship, but on a little different footing, but there's still a bond there. So oxytocin, oxytocin also causes things like it ameliorates the effect of let's say Stockholm syndrome. So like Stockholm syndrome ameliorates the effects. Well, it's influential in Stockholm syndrome because there's like a trauma bond there, where like the captors sort of form a relationship with the captees, the prisoners, let's say, or let's say the prisoners start to view the captors more sympathetically because they're around them. There's sort of like some sort of relationship growing, and it muddies the waters a bit. But in isolation and lockdown, people's oxytocin systems are just completely damaged, basically, because we evolved to be social human creatures, right? A baby that isn't touched dies if it's not touched after being born, right? So that's really tragic if you think about it, right? But we evolved to be around other people, and or at least other we can have substitutes like pets and cats, dogs, maybe some like multimedia stuff like movies or game characters, or maybe they can provide some sort of social thing, but it's not a substitute for seeing someone in the flesh, seeing the face, seeing the full face without a mask. Touch, touch, that's a bit more that's like more of a intimate thing, but that's why you get a good benefit from massage and like acupuncture and even meditation. All of these things sort of stimulate the body's oxytocin system. So if you shut all that off with isolation, plus you're indoors, right? You get no vitamin D, and vitamin D actually activates oxytocin in the skin. Like the skin holds like a complete vitamin D synthesis system to turn I think it's some cholesterol into full vitamin D, and there are vitamin D receptors on oxytocin cells and neurons. So like your oxytocin system can't really work too well without vitamin D. And you can take a supplement, but a supplement's not going to reach the periphery, like the dense clusters of oxytocin neurons in the brain or in the skin in enough concentration. And if you did have enough concentration reaching it, it'd be toxic elsewhere potentially. So lockdowns really sort of created fear and loathing, because when the mind's on vasopressin and without oxytocin to sort of like keep trust and bonding and like deep connection there, and you're dealing with someone on emails or let's say over Zoom calls on the phone, and then there's you don't see anything of that person for like days or hours, or that isn't the same as being in the same building or having the potential to meet them for a beer or food, or at least see them in the office or have a group meeting in person where you can sense the natural social dynamics and like you can talk, you can relate to each other. You're left sort of like puzzled, like with a negative valence, like a negative perception from like the vasopressin, right? It breeds paranoia, and the paranoia basically has boosted like toxic sort of work environments where it's put a damper on like relationships, because if you have a disagreement, right, normally you get around a table and you talk things through, you thrash things out, and you come to an agreement or come close to something that works, agree to disagree, or some sort of like compromise or something, and then you get back to work. But without that, getting around a table, right? There's that sort of like that bonding, that sort of like that connection that underlies the sort of petty sort of political, let's say, dominance hierarchy struggles, isn't there. So, and plus, new relationships are really hard to form because, number one, you can't really meet anyone. Number two, if you do meet someone, right, in the COVID period, it might be illegal, or you have to stay at distance, or there are very limited social interactions available at the moment, right? And through text message, email, phone, Zoom, they're no real substitute at all to actual meeting in person. And then having like good vibes in a social environment, or business environment, or whatever environment we're going to choose. And everyone's got this negative valence. So it's a very peculiar situation we're in, and I think it's going to last until potentially sort of spring, summertime, probably summertime, where the vaccines sort of start to make people feel more confident. We get vitamin D from sunlight and the sun. We start to go out, and the vibe improves, and the sort of scarcity mindset and the easing of lockdown restrictions allows real social bonding, because that's something we need as humans. And some things you can do to help your let's say mental health in the meantime is to supplement with oxytocin, and do activities that sort of boost oxytocin naturally. So things like exercise or socializing, if at all possible. So meditation can boost oxytocin, and romantic relationships, and petting pets, and karaoke, singing, listening to music. They all boost oxytocin. But to be honest, without vitamin D, oxytocin's like low, right? So like if you're a person with dark skin, you should definitely be supplementing with vitamin D, but also consider UVB therapy, where you can get UVB light in low concentrations to create vitamin D in your retina, which then goes through to your brain and sort of activates your oxytocin neurons there to sort of really sort of help with the negative effects of isolation, low sunlight, and all this madness. Because oxytocin's linked to a strong immune system. It basically activates the immune system. In HIV, oxytocin's downregulated, and like the T cell CD4 plus count is reduced. In something that's like oxytocin's known to increase T cell like antiviral counts. So fear, loathing, and lockdown. How do we get out of it? We do it through connection and boosting our oxytocin, and also dealing with the virus problem to make it not a threat. Through vaccines, through effective implementation of policy of social distancing, but without harming our natural ability to generate oxytocin, if at all possible. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I'm going to create some videos talking specifically around vasopressin, specifically around oxytocin, specifically around dynorphin and the vitamin D oxytocin sort of link through serotonin. And this is all like kind of new science, or sort of stuff I've pieced together based on like some really good studies. So it's going to be an exciting next few weeks when I start to share some of this stuff. So thank you.